Welcome back everybody to Orange Track Outlaws. Today we are going to make a custom car out of some parts and pieces left over from a Hot Wheels Way2Fast model that you see here, and also an engine that I had from another scrap Hot Wheels. I'm not sure what exactly came off of. I think it was a McDonald's version possibly, but not sure. It was just in the junk drawer, and I thought it'd look pretty cool chopping this Way2Fast up and put it on here. So let's get started. So here we go. Here's our project rolling in here. Here's a good look at our engine. It's got a cool front end with the radiator attached and the headlights, and pretty much a look at our Way2Fast, which is pretty well complete other than the engines that I scavenged for another project. But what I'm looking to do here is basically shorten the front end up and drop this motor in and see if we can't make a cool hot rod out of it. I got a couple plans here. I'm going to chop the top off and a couple other things, get some big old back tires. But let's get started here getting the engine to fit right. So the way it must have clipped into the old car, there was a front little lip there. So I'm going to go ahead and use my rotary tool and cut that off and try and flatten this out a little bit, so when it sits in my my new chassis here, it'll be nice and level. So basically this is just going to be a trial and error type process here. I'm just going to kind of trim the fit, file it down, try to see what the best way is to do this, but it's going to be pretty hard to get it to fit right until I cut some of those old exhaust pipes off the side. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Go ahead and use my tool and take my time here and just try to trim those off nice and flush. Once I get these exhaust pipes off, I'll do another test fit, and I'm gonna have to cut the chassis in half here and probably JB weld it back together at some point. Take a big chunk out of there to shorten it up and make the engine look like it fits. So I think we just about got through this guy, and you just want to take your time with it. You don't want to go too fast. You don't want to push too hard. If you ever work with these cut-off wheels, if you don't, it works fine if you don't push it. If you end up tweaking it or pushing too hard or something, that little disc snaps off really. So got our front side off, cut the other side off camera. I'm going to do another test fit here, and I think it's going to be okay. So next we're going to move into making our mounting hole here, and then we're going to chop our chassis up a little bit. But the old post hole just doesn't line up quite right with the new engine. So what we're going to do here is we're going to drill a new mounting hole, and later on in the video we will fill that other the old post hole, we'll fill that up with some putty, so you won't be able to see it. But pretty straightforward here. We're just going to cut our hole in our chassis, widen it up so it lines up with the motor, and we should be pretty well good to go here. So now this thing is fitting kind of where we want it to be. So after we get a look at this thing, put our body back on here. You can get a look at our gap there, about 3/8, ½ inch or so. I don't know. But what we're going to need to do is cut the chassis up and shorten that gap. So that is what we're going to start working on here. So I got it cut up. I made it into, I cut it into like a V style instead of straight across to give it a little more bonding surface. I'm going to use some JB Weld here. But you can take a look there as I take it apart, the little the triangle kind of connector that I'm using here. So I'm going to try to layer up the JB Weld in the grooves. I'm going to put it back together and layer up a little more weld kind of on top and bottom. I'm going to try to glob it on there as best as inconspicuous, I guess, as it can be, and you know, hopefully it should stick together. After I put this on here, I'm just going to let it sit in my grips here overnight, probably at least 24 hours, let it dry up before I start working on it. But as you can see here, I think it looks pretty good. It's pretty straight. I'll check it out looking at it from the side, make sure it's not too crazy. But this is actually the first chassis I've had to chop and re-weld, so kind of trial and error for me right now, but it's not going too bad. I think it'll turn out okay once the JB Weld dries and we got a good solid bond. But right now I'm just trying to be, you know, pretty cautious with the amount of weld I'm using, but I also want to make sure that it's enough. But I'm going to take this thing up here, try to tweak it here before it dries, make sure it's straight front to back, and look at it from the side, make sure it's not wavy. So here's a look at our chassis after it dried overnight. I think it turned out pretty well. We got to be able to sand down a little bit extra JB Weld and paint it up, but as you can see here, our engine fits pretty nice, our body fits nice. We are going to have to fill in that little bit of gap there between the body and the engine. So there is a hole in the front there, so we're going to put a little filler in front there before we go to paint. But the next step here, I believe, is we're going to have to chop up that body a little bit more, because I kind of like this body with the top off. So I'm going to cut that off, but before I do that, when I had it together, I noticed that these pipes stuck out. They stuck back a little too far where the wheels are going to be. So if I don't cut these tips off, we're going to hit our wheels, and obviously we don't want that. So I'm just going to trim them back a little bit to basically right in front of the fender, so they don't hit our wheels. But we're just going to trim them back, and I am going to drill a little bit of a hole in the tip there and make it look a little bit better, more like an exhaust tip, so it's not just flat with a little black paint painted over. I'm actually going to put a little hole in there and make it look like a real exhaust tip. But right now I'm just going to trim up the excess metal on the tip so it's not pointy or nothing, and give it a little test fit here, and you can get a good look here. Yeah, see, I put the wheel in front, got the tips right there by the door, right in front of the wheel. They're not going to hit, so it's in a good spot. So another thing I thought about doing here, since I'm going to open the top up, and actually the Way2Fast interior is a one-seater right in the middle. Don't really like that. I have a couple other seats laying around here. I want to give this thing a 2 front seat and actually a 2 rear seat. So I got an old two-seater, which would be the front seats. Not sure what this came off of. I just had these laying around, rip rod maybe or something. But what I'm going to do is trim the tabs off the back. I'm going to trim the front up pretty good, and actually I got to trim the sides down and shave those down actually a lot to get those things to fit in, to fit in the body, you know, nice and tight. Which it's going to take a lot of finagling, a lot of trimming with the rotary disc, and a lot of filing, but she'll get in there eventually. So just definitely want to make sure that the front's trimmed down so we have room for the back seat. But as soon as we get enough material off on the front, here's our donor car for our rear seat. Got to trim the front tabs, the front and the back tabs off. We also got to trim the sides down pretty good to match the front so it fits in our chassis, fits on our body there. It's going to be a tight fit, but I think it'll look good when we're done. So once we get these guys trimmed down, I'm going to kind of put them together a little bit just to see if they fit. We're gonna glue these down on a piece of styrene later, so we can get a nice solid interior going in. But pretty much got our interior just about figured out. So you can see I've already started on chopping the roof off of this. I really like the open top kind of look for this style of body. I also want to put, like, I guess you call it a joker shift in here made out of a pin. I think that'll really top the interior off. But here's a look at my body now. I got the top taken off. It's going to take a good bit of filing to get it all looking nice and straight and even and all the jagged edges. But here's a little test fit of the front and back seats that I trimmed down. You can see that they fit in there pretty good. So we're going to get our body sanded down, filed down, so we got no jagged edges. Since it's not a straight cut on the top here, it kind of angles in about halfway. So we got to file these down, try to make it look as best as we can, I guess as factory as we can, so it doesn't just look like, you know, crazy jagged cuts in there. But really like the open roof. I guess it's not quite convertible style, but I was gonna make a convertible, but then I still like the look of the rear window and the side windows, and I didn't want to cut those off, so I ended up leaving those on, but I still wanted the open roof, so I ended up cutting the top off. So we're just going to take our file, we're going you know, as hard as we can, try to get it all looking nice and straight, and it is pretty tedious to take the tops off of these vehicles, and then it does take a lot of file work, so you definitely got to be patient. But the file actually does a really good job. You don't have to, you know, you don't have to worry about it taking forever. I mean, it does take a long time, but it's worth it. It really ends up being worth it, and it's really not that hard. So, you know, if you got a nice file kit where you have you know, the flat stock to get all the sides, and you can get in there with the square one to get the corners filed down, so you don't have, you know, either rounded corners or uneven corners. That's the way I like to do it. It seems to work the best. I'm working the square one right now, just making sure that all my corners They look nice and square. They look like they were actually meant to be there, even though they weren't there originally. But I think I pretty much got it where I want it to go. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our inner fender in here. We're going to take our thinnest piece of styrene stock and super glue that in there to give us a little bit of a fender look. On the original Way2Fast, the inner fender was built into the interior, so that's why it's not there anymore, and I wanted to put that back in place, primarily so you don't see the interior behind the wheel. So I didn't want it to see through, so I'm going to go ahead and cut some styrene and glue it in place. Once we get it primed and painted, I think you'll appreciate the fact that this is there instead of any see-through, and it shouldn't be too difficult to put in. So really just a couple cuts, enough to cover that fender, a little super glue, and we should be good to go here. So right now I'm trimming down the other side. You can see I got the one side put in. We're just going to trim down the other side, make sure she fits, drop a little super glue on there, and put it in place. So make sure you get it in the right spot where you want it, and the super glue takes hold pretty quick, and just like that, we got ourselves some inner fenders. A little test fit on our chassis. It should fit in there quite nice, since the space is already allocated due to the inner fender on the old interior, and it fits pretty good. There will be we'll have to notch out just a little bit in the center on the bottom there for the axle, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. So next up, while we got our styrene out, you can see I cut a little piece for the firewall to fill our gap between our body and our engine. It's pretty basic. I didn't put it on video here cutting out the styrene, but basically it's just trimmed to fit. I'll fill it with some putty in a little bit, and we're just going to super glue this guy in place, and we'll make it look like it was meant to be there here shortly. But what we're trying to do is to fill the hole in the front firewall, since it was gone, and also to close the gap between the body and the engine. So we're going to give it a little bit of a test fit here, but I do have to notch a little bit of that new front firewall to get it to fit in our chassis. There are a couple ridges underneath that thing's got to fit kind of on, so we're just going to get it notched out here real quick and go for a test fit. So you can see I don't quite have it perfect, so we're going to take a little bit off the bottom there, and we want to make sure that our chassis goes up inside our body and fits flush, and make sure our mounting post gets through that chassis just enough so we can mount the screw. So I think I just about got it fitting pretty well here. Body fits on nice, so off to the paint booth we go. And you can see that I did put a little bit of putty to round off the rough edges on the new firewall. A little bit of Milliput, just kind of filled it in, sanded it down real quick. Pretty easy right there. So we are going to start off with some gray primer sealer from Createx. I got really nice cool paint job idea in mind here, kind of like a pearl candy tangerine coming up. So we'll get to that in a minute, but first off we're going to give a couple coats of our gray primer here just to get everything coated and covered up and give a good surface for our new paint stick to. So another coat here, you can see that it's covering up the styrene quite well. It's covering the body quite well. So it shouldn't have any variations in shade or color once we get to some paint. So I think that's looking really good. So here we are, we're going to put down our base coat, which I'm going for like an orange tangerine-ish color. So we're going to start with some opaque yellow and some opaque red to get ourselves an orange color. We're going to put some 40-30 in it, and we're going to thin it with some 40-12 from Createx. So here's a little look at the tangerine orange color we got, and we're going to start laying this down nice and light. We're probably going to go for 3 or 4 coats here. Make sure we have you know, a nice orange base to start our candy pearls next. But with our first base coat, we're going to put it on here somewhat. We're going to give it a nice coverage, and you know, give the rest of the coat something to bond to. And then we're just going to start layering it on until we get the color that we're going for. So you can see the orange starting to look pretty good. It's starting to look like an actual actual orange. I guess it's not a crisp orange. It's more like, you know, kind of like tangerine-ish. That's what I'm kind of going for here. So coming right along. The base coat color I'm looking for, you know, I'm really liking how we're going here. So now we're going to work on our candy pearl. Basically, trying to get an undercoat of pearl, little candy. So I'm going to have our pearl tangerine, and we're going to mix this with a little bit of candy. In this case, it's going to be the tequila yellow. I'm looking for a little bit of that yellow undertone and that pearl, and to make it even better, I want to put some hot rod sparkle in it. We're going to put a little 40-30 in it, and then we're going to thin it with some 40-12. I think this paint is really going to pop off this tangerine base coat. So let's get to spraying and see how this thing turns out. I'm pretty excited to see how this sprays. You can see some of that hot rod sparkle flakes, you know, bouncing off that car, but you know, a lot of it will be sticking to it once it gets a good light on it. After it gets some clear on it, you're really going to see that sparkle come through. So we got our first coat on. Now we're into our second coat. We're going to start layering it on just a little heavier each time. Until we get what we're looking for. You can see that you can already see a little bit of that hot rod sparkle, you know, kind of coming through when the light hits it. But we're going to put a little bit more on here. Make sure we get it. Make sure we get full coverage. You know, front, back, side to side, inside, outside, top, bottom, all that. Just make sure you get it nice, good, and coated. Looking really good to me. Next part here, just to set it off a little more, I'm going to take a little candy blood red, and I'm going to paint, I'm going to fade in a flame on each side. So I'm going to take my blood red, and I'm going to go nice and light, but somewhat heavy, I guess, in the front side you call it, and I want to fade it towards the rear, you know, really lighter. So I want it real heavy red in the front, fade it to a lighter orange in the back of the flame, so it fades into that candy tangerine once we take the tape off there. So to get this effect, I gotta go real slow and real light. I still have my PSI pumped up to like 40, I think, but I'm putting as little air through the gun as possible, and I'm just going over and over and over in the front to layer on the red, and then try to hit on like a 45 degrees, and fade it in sideways. So it is going to take a little bit of a process, because if you know how the candy paints go, obviously the more you layer it, the deeper and darker you get, and that's kind of what I'm going for in the front, is a candy red, fade back. So that's what I'm going to keep doing. Layer in the front and kind of fade spray it towards the back, and I think it's turning out pretty good. And once I get all this tape off and show you what I ended up with, I think you're gonna like it. So pretty much got that part done. We're gonna let it dry. You can see I cut a piece of styrene to basically fit my interior. I went ahead and glued them things down. What I kind of had envisioned here for the interior was like a nice white interior with a little like orange accents in the middle of the seats. So that's kind of what I'm going for here. I'm taking some Createx white primer sealer. I'm going to go over all this and try to get all that black as covered up as best as possible with some white, and then I'll go in later with the paintbrush and try to highlight the interior with the orange and black steering wheel and whatever. But here's the rest of here's the final result here, and you can kind of see how my faded flames look. I went ahead and painted the interior orange to highlight the interior there. I got my wheels on, basic with the wheels, brass tubing and all, glue them in. There's lots of videos on putting the wheels in, so I didn't put that in this one. But we're gonna go try and put this thing back together. And our interior, it's gonna be tight. We knew it was gonna be tight to begin with. By adding paint, made it a little bit tighter, unfortunately. But we're going to press on, get that thing forced in there, and we got our interior in. We got our body on, and everything is fitting pretty good. Everything's looking good. I really wish you guys could see this paint job as I'm seeing it here. Putting it on video and the light just doesn't do it justice, but we're going to look at our final result on the turntable, and maybe you can see the light hit it a little bit. But we're going to go ahead and get this thing screwed in here. Make sure our wheels are still turning, fitting, everything's fitting quite right. We're going to go ahead and put our polished motor in here. Make sure we get a good test fit. Everything is looking good. It's fitting good so far. We're going to get this thing screwed in here, and yeah, we'll be ready to show you our final result here real soon. So we got everything together. We're going to make sure everything in the front, everything looks straight. Make sure it's not lopsided, whatever, with the radiator looking straight. Make sure our exhaust pipes are looking straight, and just make sure we go over everything. Make sure our wheels are turning. Make sure everything's straight. I don't know what you guys think. I think this car is looking really good. This is pretty much what I had pictured in my mind. I do have my pin there. I'm going to super glue in a joker shift here, and you'll be able to see that here directly. But first, I want to show you what we started off with. We started with the Way2Fast. minus the engine. You can see I got an extra engine from another scrap car. You know, this took a lot of chopping, a lot of body work, and you can take a look now at what we come up with. And this is our chop top Joker shift, Way2Fast, open engine. Got our fancy tangerine pearl candy paint job with our blood red faded flames. We got our oversized tires in the back, chrome rims. I don't know about you guys, this car turned out amazing. This is really what I had in my mind here. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for tuning in, and if you like what you see, please hit that subscribe button. And got some more customs coming out, so look out for those. Got some more races coming. Please watch those. And thank you again, and we will see you next time. See ya.